Hey folks, Iolair here, and welcome back to my series on battle practices in World of Warships. In today's video, I'll cover how these practices apply to destroyers. And if you have yet to see my introductory video on battle practices, I do strongly recommend that you watch that video first. It does lay the groundwork and structure for this video and the videos I'm doing for the other classes. Now, I will leave a link for the introductory video in the description below, as well as an index for this video, so that you can skip around to watch sections as you'd like. Now, the discussion in this video will be aligned more toward concealment destroyer playstyles, as opposed to gunboat playstyles like that of the Russian or French destroyers, which traditionally play more like very fast light cruisers. However, I will say that when I am playing a gunboat destroyer, I will follow concealment destroyer practices if that's what my team needs. For example, if I'm the only destroyer left on my team, or I'm the only destroyer on my team's flank, it may very well be more important that I apply practices like that of a concealment destroyer by holding my fire, staying in concealment, taking cap points, spotting, etc. Now, finally, I will structure this video the same way that I approached the points in the introductory video, thus the value of seeing the introductory video. I'll start with going to port and talking through what it means to learn your ship as a destroyer, and then I'll use a battle that I had to talk through the battle practices themselves and what it means in terms of destroyer gameplay. And then I'll wrap up with assessing my results from that battle as part of assessing performance as a destroyer player. So from the introductory video, I have 4 parts to learning your ship before going into random battles and certainly into more competitive arenas like ranked or clan battles. The first is to study the parameters of the ship and port, which I'll do here with the Sims, since that's the ship that I will feature in the replay. And I'll concentrate or highlight the parameters that I think are most important to look for on a destroyer. The second and third parts are to research the playstyle and the components that are suitable for the destroyer, either by talking to colleagues who play the destroyer well, or by finding online resources, whether that be community contributor videos or the World of Warships wiki, Facebook, Reddit, etc. And then the last part is to practice in co-op. And here again, I'll talk about what specific types of things I'm looking for in destroyers when I'm practicing in co-op. I also want to come back very briefly to playstyle, because this is an area, especially for destroyers, where players can get very frustrated because they attempt to apply the playstyle of one line or type of ship or type of destroyer with the ones that they're learning. And the classic example I can think of is for when learning the Russian or Soviet gunboats, because I often see players get very frustrated saying, the concealment is terrible, the torpedo ranges are very short, I can't play these ships, they're terrible. But what they haven't realized is that the playstyle of most of the Soviet or Russian gunboats is you stay at range from your targets, constantly shooting your guns, you don't care that you're detected, your speed is your armor, and your torpedoes are only for ambush situations or YOLO situations. And once people have sort of that epiphany or it kind of clicks in their head, they often have a good realization that of how to play the ships better, and they end up having a much more enjoyable and successful experience. All right, so coming to parameters of the ship. So armor on destroyers, by and large, isn't really material. There are a couple of exceptions, like with the Khabarovsk, but otherwise these ships are going to be penetrated by everything, and they don't have any citadels to worry about. Next is survivability, which is something to be concerned with because the hit point pool says a lot about the endurance and the amount of punishment that a destroyer might be able to take in any sort of engagements. And engaging opposing destroyers and knowing the hit points of your ship relative to the opponents you're going to face has a significant bearing on your efficacy in a battle. In fact, in the replay that I'm going to feature, that is going to be a major point of my participation in the game. This is also why the survivability expert skill is very commonly taken on destroyer builds, because it increases the hit point pool for most destroyers usually about 15%, which is very appreciable. And it's even more for ships that have the repair party consumable. Next item to focus on is artillery. It really, in a lot of ways, doesn't matter which line you're on. While historically, the ships like the Japanese destroyers have sort of been ignored with regard to their gun systems, they have been improved in the last year. And so even the Japanese destroyers can put up a material fight. In fact, in the replay, I will be facing a couple of Japanese destroyers, and I will have a table where I'll show the DPM characteristics of the of my opponents. Speaking of DPM, this is the aspect that you want to understand with regard to your artillery, because most of the time when you're fighting other destroyers, it should be with your guns. There are going to be exceptions, but by and large, it's going to be with your gun systems, and knowing your DPM is very important. So to calculate DPM, you take 60, which is the number of seconds per minute. You divide by the reload of your ship in seconds, and you may have to factor in modifiers if you're looking at a ship that you don't have, or you want to understand the impact of other modifiers you're not using. In this case, my reload on my sims, the base reload is 3.3 seconds, but because I have the commander assigned to the ship and it's factoring in BFT, Wargaming does show that my reload is now 3.0 seconds. After dividing by your reload, you then multiply by the number of guns that you have, in this case 4, and then you multiply by the alpha per shell, usually HE, in this case 1800, and that gives my sims a slightly more than 145,000 theoretical DPM. Now, that number is not realistic because it assumes all shells hit and they all do Citadel levels of damage, but the number is at least can be used as a comparison to the similarly calculated numbers for other destroyers that you might go up against. And again, I'll have a table in the replay where I'll show how I compare against the opposing destroyers. You also want to know your main battery firing range, and when you go to practice your ship in co-op, you want to get a feel for how the shell arcs are and the ballistics of the shells. And the U.S. Navy destroyers tend to have among the floatiest shell ballistics. They can be learned, but it's a practice that you need to get down. After artillery, obviously you want to know your torpedo systems. You should look at the range of the torpedoes, the reload rate, how far they go, and their detection by sea. Now, I happen to run, well, and one other factor, you also want to know what torpedo options you have. For researchable ships, you will often have upgradable torpedoes, which tend to increase the range and alpha or both. In the case of premium ships, like with the Sims, you may only have one choice, or you may have two. The Sims can mount either 7-kilometer torpedoes that have decent alpha and are pretty quick, or they mount what we refer to as sea mines, which are these destroyer torpedoes are very slow at 49 knots. They have a relatively poor alpha at just shy of 10,000, but they reload really fast at 76 seconds, and they have a range of 10.5 kilometers. So they are very good for area control. So you want to understand your torpedo systems. This will tell you whether you can stealth torpedo, whether you can't, like with a lot of the Russian or Soviet destroyers, or whether you have to employ what's called fadeaway torpedoing, where you can stay in concealment, torp in the direction of ships that are sailing toward you while you're sailing away from them, and you can still torpedo in stealth, but you have to get quite close to do it. So after torpedoes is AA. Now, AA on destroyers requires its own video. The U.S. Navy destroyers and the Sims in particular have very good AA for her tier, but for a lot of other destroyers, their AA is quite poor. And what will matter to a large extent more is if you're in a game with a carrier is to not isolate yourself, even if you do have very good AA. But you do want to at least understand your AA characteristics, because that can affect when you choose to turn your AA on. But most of the time, you're going to keep it off. After AA comes maneuverability. This is another big item. You want to know the speed of your ship, and you want to know the rudder shift time. The speed says a lot about your ability to disengage from opponents that might be pushing in toward you. So if you have a relatively slower destroyer, you need to think about disengaging earlier or getting away earlier. And you also want to know your rudder shift time and your turning circle radius, because that has a bearing on your ability to maneuver to avoid torpedoes that might be sent towards you, because a big part of playing a destroyer is acting as a forward scout, and you are often the first ship to detect torpedoes, and having good maneuverability can be very important. And then the last item, and this is arguably the most important property, at least for concealment destroyers, is their concealment. So you want to factor in camouflage, the concealment expert skill, and then if it's a tier 8 or higher destroyer, also factor in the concealment system upgrade in slot 5. Now, in my case for the Sims, my best concealment is 6.6 kilometers. That's not very good. And again, when I get to the gameplay, I'll have a table comparing my concealment relative to the other destroyers, or compared to the destroyers I'm going to face, and that will have some bearing about how you decide engagement practices with opposing destroyers. So these are all important things to consider. Again, if I were to focus on the top things, it would be survivability, your gun systems, your maneuverability, and your concealment. Torpedoes are important, but they're a little more secondary, depending upon how the ship is played. But for purposes of the main functions of how a destroyer can support a team, the most important is survivability, artillery, maneuverability, and concealment. Let me talk about what types of things I look for when going into co-op. First is the gun handling, including turret traverse. For a lot of destroyers, the turret traverse isn't very good, and you may need to develop a practice to get your guns turned the direction you want in advance, and so that you're always anticipating where you need your guns. The second part is to learn shell ballistics. And again, I mentioned the Sims and the US Navy destroyers tend to have very floaty shells compared to their peers, and that may be something that you have to learn in practice. Third is to understand your torpedo range relative to your concealment, so that you know the relative buffer that you have between your detection and the range of your torpedoes, because that will have an effect about how close you can get to opponents to be able to potentially torpedo them. You also want to understand the torpedo launch angles. Some destroyers have excellent torpedo launch angles and can almost fire straight ahead. Other destroyers have very poor torpedo launch angles and have to turn almost fully broadside in order to get their torpedoes away. So these are things that you want to practice in co-op, so that you understand what those are before you get into a random battle, and you don't end up having a surprise saying, oh, I didn't realize that my torpedo launch angles were so terrible. And then lastly is to get a sense of the speed and maneuverability of the destroyer, especially when you're maneuvering near terrain, so that you can be able to manipulate your ship effectively. All right, so let's end here, and we'll move to the battle practices by looking at a replay. So I'll start with the second principle of the battle practices that I recommend, which is to examine the team rosters before the battle starts. On my team, the only assumption I can make is that I should be getting support from those in my division, but everybody else on my team is a wild card, and I shouldn't make any assumptions. Conversely, I have to assume on the opposing team that everything is a potential threat. I first start by looking at the opposing destroyers, and here I have a table where I see my characteristics with regard to concealment, DPM, torpedo range, and torpedo reload in seconds, and compare that with all of the opposing destroyers. So all of the opposing destroyers other than the Mahan are going to easily outdetect me, assuming they have full concealment builds. The Mahan and I are going to be more or less the same. As far as DPM, the Yugumo, which I factored in BFT just to assume that they're building into a gunboat build, is a potential gunboat threat, as is certainly the Mahan. The Shiratsuyu, less so. The Gajimada and I are also probably pretty equal in terms of gun power. As far as torpedoes are concerned, it's not so much to be able to understand the severity of the torpedo threat toward me, but more toward my allies, because I should be acting as a screen for them. And if I know how frequently these destroyers send torpedoes and the range of their torpedoes, I can help my allies predict when those torpedoes might be coming. After I look at destroyers, I look at the radar. Now, that's usually cruisers, but it can also include the Missouri and some destroyers. Now, in this case, there are no destroyers that can mount radar, but there are two cruisers that have radar, which are the Buffalo at 10 kilometers and the Dmitry Donskoy at 12 kilometers. These are things that you want to know, and you're probably thinking to yourself, holy crap, Iolair, do I really have to know all these things about the cruisers and the destroyers, etc., etc.? And technically, no, but if you want to improve your gameplay in any particular class, knowing the capabilities of the ships and how they compare to you as a threat, yes, you are going to want to learn these things. And these are things that you'll develop over time as far as knowledge. And you can do some research and sort of study it formally, or you can develop that knowledge as a part of learning those ships themselves when you play them. And then after the radar, I obviously are the carrier threats. So there's a Shokaku. I have to assume that if I become isolated or I make myself isolated and the carrier finds me, I'm probably good as dead. The Sims does have very good AA for its tier, but under the current meta and the current capabilities of AA, a determined carrier is going to take me out. So I don't want to separate myself substantially from my allies. I want to have that mutual AA support, and I will have to be selective about when I activate AA, and I'll have some cases during the battle where I will do that. Now, the battleships are a little less of a threat potentially because I will detect them well before they become a threat directly to me. But I should be aware that obviously the Georgia and the Pomeroy have very powerful secondary armaments. And if I get detected by something else, like another destroyer or the planes or radar, and the secondaries are able to fire on me, that can be a significant threat to me as well. And the Pomeroy also carries 6-kilometer hydro. So if I happen to get lazy and hang around too close and he charges a cap, he can detect me with his hydro even if I'm in smoke. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the gameplay. Okay, so to recap my battle practices and how I'm going to apply that to my destroyer play and this particular match, I'm going to play to the objective, which means focusing on taking and defending caps. That also means I'm not going to do things that detract from the objective, which includes things like going carrier hunting or going off on some flanks in the pursuit of damage farming through torpedoes, etc. I've covered the second item, which is studying the team rosters. Third item is to stay alive, and that mainly comes down to managing concealment for destroyers. So I've turned off my AA at the start of the match, which is by default the P key, or whatever it is remapped for yourself, and I will only activate AA when it's absolutely necessary, like it's a must-survive situation, or I'm trying to provide overlapping AA support, and there will be a couple of places where I'll do that. I'm going to focus on, as far as staying alive, on deducing or identifying where my threats are. I'm concerned about the position of the Buffalo, which was last detected north of Bravo, and also there is the Dmitry Donskoy, which at this point we have not detected. I'm going to position so that I receive AA support from my allies. I do have a number of allies which are within about 5 kilometers of me. I will approach positions from open water. You want, as a destroyer player, you want to try to avoid surprise encounters, which means that you should try to stay in open water as much as you can. Don't try to stealth around hugging islands, because if you come around a corner, you may have a sudden surprise encounter with an opponent, and that could end your game really quickly. And I also need to know when to disengage. In this case, I'm going to push into Bravo because I can see that our Akatsuki is probably coming under radar from the Buffalo, and he is getting gunned down right now, or at least he's taking some damage. And I have sent torpedoes on the smoke screen that's on the north side of Bravo, because I can see that the Bravo cap is being contested. In fact, there is the radar. So I'm going to peel away here to try to get out of his radar range, but it looks like it's just gone down. Now, I'm going to have also some discussion about smoke here in a moment, because I'm going to need to use my smoke to get into concealment and break contact, which is its primary function. Coming back to my principles, I'm going to be using the minimap at all times. I look at the minimap at least 2 or 3 times a minute. It's sometimes hard when you're in a tense exchange, But by and large, in fact, early in a game, I'm navigating around by just looking at the mini map. I'm not looking at the main part of my screen. I'm going to be using my situational awareness, which goes back to the points around staying alive, maintaining some awareness of my position relative to allies, relative to threats. I'm going to be monitoring the match conditions. Right now, our team is behind. We are even on caps. I've just been detected by the Shiritsuyu, but he's going to go off detection. I'm going to turn to my starboard side here because I can now reasonably anticipate that he's probably sending torpedoes to my port side. There's also the Georgia that's very close, and this is a very dangerous situation for me. I've just lit the Mahan, who looks like he took a torpedo. I can fully expect torpedoes from him that are probably on their way. This is a very dangerous position for me, and I'm going to drop smoke now that he's gone. Now that the Mahan's been taken down, I'm going to drop smoke. So smoke should be used as a measure to get off detection. Now, that was an extremely dangerous situation, so this might be one place where I sort of re-examined, did I approach this engagement correctly in the attempts to try to get a handle on Bravo. Our team has now just evened up the ship count. We have a minor point lead. We're going to hopefully get Bravo here. I also have a threat from the Yugumo that was last detected to my east. My engine is currently out and my damage control is on cooldown. I'm just about to get this cap, but I can fully anticipate that there are torpedoes coming from the Yugumo. In fact, he's just been detected. I can also anticipate that there might be torpedoes coming from the Shiritsuyu. Now, normally I don't like sitting in smoke like this because I'm denying my team vision, and it also is basically advertising my presence, and it could invite more radar, and it also invites torpedoes. So I'm going to get out because I know at this point the torpedoes from the Yugumo are coming. In fact, our Georgia is actually under some significant threat in his current position, and there they are. There are the torpedoes from the Yugumo. So coming back to reviewing my sort of my top 10 list on battle practices, I've supported my allies here by getting the cap. I also need to maintain some good spotting. Now, using my reading the minimap, excuse me, I now know that there are no opponents to the east. They've all been taken out, including the Zara, which could have been a significant threat if I had bumped into him and he was still alive. So I am now going to turn back around, and the next thing I'm going to do with regard to supporting my team is to head back towards Bravo to help defend that cap, because both the Shira and the Yugumo were last detected in the area, and they are probably going to make a move on the cap. In fact, unfortunately, we just lost our Georgia, so part of my backup has been lost. But I've got Angry Ace, who's in my division in the Scharnhorst, just to the south of Bravo. So I know I've got backup here. The carrier also is bringing, or my allied carrier is also bringing planes. So I can also anticipate that at least one of the Yugumo or the Shiritsuyu is a reload, because if you notice, there were a lot of torpedoes that were sent into Bravo against the Georgia, more than could have been accounted for with the Yugumo and Shiritsuyu if one of them did not or if both of them did not have reload. So I can reasonably expect that one of these guys is a reload destroyer, and if I see one of them drop smoke, then I will know that that one is not a reload. So I'm in a very good position now to support my allies in defending this cap, because these guys have no backup. In fact, these two, the Shira's dropping smoke, so I know he's the one that does not have reload. Here is the low health Yugumo. He slipped a little too far out of the smoke screen, and there I'm going to finish him off. But again, I have to assume that torpedoes are on the way. In fact, there they are. And this is a reflection of the very good maneuverability of the Sims. Sims has very good rudder shift and very small turning radius. So I'm going to approach the Shira, which I know is still in the cap because the cap is being contested, send torpedoes in his general direction, and I'm going to approach him from his stern. This way, if he sent torpedoes, I'm not going to be in their path, or if he detects me, he cannot send torpedoes on me, at least immediately. So my torpedoes are on the way, and there are his torpedoes. and I'm going to proximity detect him right before my torpedoes hit him. So he made a mistake of dropping smoke and then not using it to escape, which is what you should do when you use smoke by and large. Smoke should be to break contact and get away, not to sit in. And he made the mistake of staying in the cap, and we were able to take him out. Now, at this point, I had contemplated heading north and trying to spot the opposing flank on the west side from the north, but that would have been a mistake because here, our Skonia sends torpedoes on into the cap. So fortunately, I'm going to avoid these. But it would have been a mistake for me to have headed north because that would have placed me between their carrier and the majority of their fleet, and that likely could have cornered me. And again, it would have isolated me, and that is the biggest thing that a destroyer player can mess up. If there are carriers in play, is basically to isolate themselves. That makes themselves a much easier target. So I'm going to head back down south here. I've sent torpedoes toward the Pommern, and right now my goal is to keep the opponents isolated to the Alpha cap. They can keep the cap as far as I'm concerned, so long as we keep Bravo and Charlie, and we basically press them when they attempt to come in on the cap, and we are able to focus them out. That's all we need to do. You also notice that the island here that's at my 3 o'clock position on my starboard side, I am going to keep to my west side, because if I go to the other side of the island and I get detected, like from the Buffalo or the airplanes right now, I would have been pinned and I would not have been able to get off detection. So I stayed on the east side of this island that's on my starboard side, excuse me, and that way I was able to avoid a threat. Now, at this point in the game, Jimmy Jazz, who's in the shores, who's over by the carrier at India 7, he's telling me that they've been sort of dogged by the remaining destroyer, which is the Gajah. And so I'm coming down to try to intercept him, but my radio location has just switched to his position. But this is a fairly risky position for me to be in. Now, our carrier has detected him. He's dropping a fighter to keep him detected. But both the Buffalo and the North Carolina are in a position to be able to fire on me. So I have to be careful about how I make this approach. And one of the risks I have now is I am I'm heading slightly too far south right now. And this will be one of the things that I think I linger around here too long. There is the radar from the Buffalo. So just as I was about to go off plane detection, the Buffalo popped his radar. His radar is 10 kilometers, so I want to try to get outside that range, which I am now. But the carrier is keeping me lit, and right now I don't have a whole lot of mutual AA support. So this is a position as a destroyer that you don't want to be in. I did activate my AA to try to chase off his planes. I am going to cut down a few of them. But this is the one main mistake that I think I make, is that I do the right thing to try to intercept the Gajah, but I've separated myself a little too much. Plus, I'm also sailing away from the objective. So my ally, Angry Ace in the Scharnhorst, who's in the Bravo cap, he is basically not getting enough backup. I should be closer to him to support him, and I continue to wander off south here in pursuit of the Gajah, who is still, again, backed up by the Buffalo and the North Carolina. So again, this is going to be a place where I have to sort of contemplate, am I doing the right thing for my team, being so far from the objective, chasing a destroyer that's not playing to the objective, mainly looking to try to intercept him. Now I'm going to start fighting him with my guns. I am sending torpedoes here because I thought he might be staying in his smoke, which he doesn't. But I am being targeted by 2. In fact, I think I end up getting targeted by 3 here. But I've done enough damage now to the Gajah that I'm driving him off, and that should be enough. I shouldn't have to continue to pursue him. I should head back north and try to help support the cap at Bravo. In fact, the opponents had briefly gotten into Bravo, but the carrier was able to finish off the Georgia that moved into the cap. And at this point, I should stop firing. I should have stopped firing a few salvos ago. I'm being a little too greedy in my attempts to drive off the Gajah. I'm forced to drop into smoke to break contact. I'll wait till my gun bloom goes down, and then I should exit the smoke. Now, the way I should exit my smoke is actually to the north, to head back towards Bravo. I'm heading south here to try to get vision again. I do want to get vision for my team, but I am going the wrong direction. I should be heading the other way. All right, so at this point in the game, we are even on ships, but our team actually has a pretty healthy point lead. The Buffalo is low health. I'm going to try to keep eyes on him, but again, with him sailing north, I'm going to lose vision on him fairly shortly because of my smoke screen. And this is again part, yeah, there he goes. And this is part of the reason that I made the mistake of heading south out of my smoke when I should have been heading north. All right, I'm going to get turned around here. And because the next threat is the North Carolina, who's very healthy. And we need to be able to continue to defend the cap. So yeah, the point lead remains, well, it's almost 200 points, and we do have a 1 cap advantage, but we need to try to keep it that way. So now I'm finally heading back in the direction that I should have been heading for a while. I'm calling target on the Buffalo, but we can't see him because I dropped smoke and I went the wrong direction, and I'm denying vision for my team. I'm also isolated, and that means that the carrier is going to be able to get another drop on me. I am going to activate my AA and turn on my defensive fire while I'm maneuvering here to try to throw off his rocket attacks. But I am also being targeted by the Buffalo, who gets a nice big whack on me, including 2 fires. So I really need to break off here. I turn off my AA because the planes have gone, and I need to get off detection from the Buffalo. I'm going to continue to call target on here. Jimmy Jazz, who's in the shores on the south end of Charlie, is able to fire on him. Ooh, the Buffalo is down to just about 100 hit points. In fact, once the Buffalo goes down, that's going to pretty well lock things up. The North Carolina has been driven off from Bravo. He will go down after the Buffalo, and that's going to wrap up the game. And then I'll cut over to the post-match results where I can talk about how I think I performed in game and get your thoughts on things. All right, let's wrap this up. How do I think I did? Well, I think I did pretty well. I only did 21,000 in damage, but all of my damage was against the opposing destroyers. I think I was very effective in helping contain their destroyer threat, which is a key part of what you should do as a destroyer player. Now, sometimes you can do that with guns. That is normally the engagement model, but in that one case with the Shiratsuyu, I was able to approach his position from stealth and use my torpedoes to finish him off. Now, mistakes where I think I made them were, and I called some of these out already, I stayed in my smoke in the south end of the Bravo cap, and that made me a target for the torpedoes from the Yugumo. Thankfully, I was able to avoid them. The bigger concern I have with my performance is that I spent too much time chasing the Gajimata. I think I did the right thing to chase him off initially, but once I had gotten about half of his health, I should have immediately broke contact, headed back north to Bravo. He had already gotten the message that I was going to be prepared to intercept him again if he tried to come back. And also our carrier was starting to pay attention to him as well. So not getting sort of tunnel visioned on opponents like that is important. You can see that I came under attack from the Buffalo, from the carrier. So I was fortunate that I was able to avoid being taken out. But I did overextend myself in that case, both against the carrier as well as the backup that the Gajimata had. I think the other mistake I made was in my engagement with the Mahan in the Bravo cap, because I had not paid close enough attention to the position of the Georgia that was backing up their destroyers. I ended up being targeted by 5 at one point. Thankfully, I had smoke ready to go, which is something that you want to consider when you're approaching engagements, is whether you're going to be able to break contact. So a few things that I probably could have adjusted, but otherwise I'm satisfied with this game. And thanks to me being in the Sims, which gets a particularly high XP buff, even for a premium, I ended up with a base XP above 2,000. So again, something to be proud of. So this was a long video. I know that's part of the reason I put the index in the video description so that you guys can maybe go through it in chunks. I'm going to wait several days before I put out another one of these videos because I really need to get feedback from you guys to understand, is this a good level of detail? Is this too much, etc. I'm also trying to structure things so that you guys can focus on the areas that maybe you are most interested in. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this review of battle guidance, or battle practices, I should say, for playing destroyers. I've only covered 10% of the material, but hopefully it's the 10% that occurs 90% of the time and gives you a good basis to work from going forward. With that, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.